Well, I get the privilege today of introducing Ben Blevins. And Ben and his family moved to the Moscow area from Waco, Texas. And I got to meet Ben at some event we met, and he's like, hey, do you know this guy named Marty Solomon? We started talking, and I immediately recognized that Ben has a lot of biblical chops. And I figured out that he has a lot of biblical chops because he's been to Israel 10 times. He's studied over there at Jerusalem, JUC, right? Jerusalem University. He's been to Turkey twice, Egypt twice. So he's spent a lot of time in the text, and he is passionate about the text. He's in our sermon club. He and his wife are partners at our church. His wife serves in our children's ministry, and their family has been a great blessing. Ben has been a personal great blessing to me with the text and in our sermon club, and he's added so much to our sermon club. So I'm really honored that I get to introduce to you Ben, and he's going to share with us today. So Ben, love you.
When I was 7 years old, I was mauled by a bear. Now, I'm what we call in my family an ornery cuss, and I'm going to explain that to you. Some of you probably already know what I mean. You have one in your family too. But I like to do things to mess with people. And my grandmother, she was amazing. And I had this thing about scaring her every chance I got, because she always reacted the way that you wanted somebody to react. It was, oh, Ben, And so I would scare her any chance I had. And one time we're hiking in the Rio Grande, and we're going down, and I had been using my knife to, cut these little things, trying to say like there was a mountain lion or a bear, and I decided I would scoot up ahead and hide somewhere and jump out and scare her. So I go up ahead, and I find this crevice about this wide, and it goes back a little ways, but I thought I could see the end, and it was tall enough for me at 7 to get in there. And so I get in and I start waiting. And I can hear them coming, and as they get close and I'm getting ready to jump out, I wasn't the only one in this cave. And this bear jumps on my head, runs around, and then bites onto my ear, and I come out trying to get it off. And instead of scaring them, they're all laughing at me while I try to get this thing off of me. Now, it was only about this big, and it had this big bushy tail, and you might call it a squirrel. But when you're 7 years old and something attacks you from behind in a cave, it's a bear, I promise. Now, I was born in Norman, Oklahoma, and I was Sooner born and Sooner bred. So those of you know that's the University of Oklahoma. And so as I grew up and graduated high school, I naturally went to Oklahoma State. I don't know what happened. I needed to make my own way is the best way I can say it. My mom and dad had both went to OU, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles for the most part, and I needed to do something different. And praise God that I did, because when I got to Oklahoma State, I found Jesus. And I began participating in my relationship with him. I believe he always had a relationship with me, but I just wasn't participating. But through the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and a man named John Talley at Oklahoma State, I gave my life to Jesus, and I began participating in that. Now, in 2003, I got married to my beautiful wife, Brooke. And in 2006, we went on our first trip to Israel with Ray Vanderlaan, who some of you may know, but he has a ministry called That the World May Know. And on this, if you've never been, those of you who have been understand this, but if you've never been to Israel, they have what's called the family check. And this is so we don't leave people when you go places. You go from site to site to site to site. You might hit 8 or 10 of them in a day. You have to get on and off the bus, and Ray hates getting on and off the bus. He wants you to go fast. So when you get back on the bus, he says family check, and that's you and your spouse, and then another couple. And the other couple in my family check also happened to be on their first trip to Israel, and that was a couple named Brad and Shallon Gray. Some of you know them, which was interesting because the first day I show up here, Adam's up here preaching, and he shows a picture of him in Turkey with my friend Brad Gray. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool. God's been doing something. Now, if that isn't enough, in 2016, I was in Egypt, and there were 3 ladies on my trip that were someplace, they were from like someplace called like Boise, something like that. In Oklahoma, we call it Boise City. There's a Boise City, Oklahoma. But they were like, it was way out west for us. I don't know. But I got to know them pretty well. I took some pictures of them when we spent the night on Mount Sinai one night. And in the morning, I took some pictures. I texted it to them. And we got to become friends. And I would text one of them about once, maybe twice a year for a while. And then I hadn't texted them in a couple years. But a few months ago, we were talking about, do you have pictures for, this thing? And I said, yeah, I think I have a picture for that. And I found a picture of the three of us, and then there were about 3 other people from our trip, because we were the only ones that crawled through these tunnels in Israel when we went to Israel on that trip. And so they just took a picture of the group that crawled the tunnels. And I was like, I think Nicole was from Idaho. So I looked, and sure enough, she has a 208 area code. So I texted her, and I said, you're not going to believe this, Nicole. She goes, did you move to Boise? And I said, no, but about 1.5 years ago, we moved to Moscow. And she texted me back. She said, you're not going to believe this. My cousin Logan, who was on the trip, moved back to Moscow about 6 months ago. She said, you should go to a church called Real Life, and you should meet Christy Pedro. And I texted her back. I said, you're not going to believe this. I've been sitting next to her in Sermon Club for over a year. So it's amazing to me how God begins to prepare the way long before we even know where Idaho is. You know what I mean? I knew that Idaho had potatoes, and that for the most part, it looks like those fingers they give you at the football games. You know, those little foam fingers? Anyway, they hold up the number 1. So anyways, about 2 years ago, we moved here from Texas, 2,000 miles. And I, at the time, was the worst dad ever. I had ruined my kids' lives forever. There they are. There's me, my wife, my son Eli, my oldest daughter Addie, and my youngest Eliana. And we moved here, and I literally was the worst. I had ruined their life forever. I asked them a couple weeks ago at breakfast, I said, would you like to go back? And they said, no, we don't. And I'm proud to say at that time they said, you're back in the top 100 people in the world. And I was like, it's the world, so that's pretty good, top 100. But if you don't think that's good, just know that before I asked them one time, I said, I'm your favorite person in the world. And they're like, Dad, you're barely in the top 30. So 100's not that bad. So like Josh said, I've been in Sermon Club for over a year now. And I know he said some good things about me, but we also learned last week that we can't trust his word very much. So take that for what it is. But I do love Matthew. It's my favorite gospel. So when we decided to do Matthew and start working through it, I was super excited. I love Matthew because there's just so much in the text. Everything Matthew says, there's just so much to it. As you can tell, we're in chapter 5, and we've been doing this like 6 months. You know what I mean? So it's a lot. So I was super excited. And at some point, Josh said, well, which ones do you want? And I was like, I'll take these 2. And so I picked these 2. And so I'm super excited today to share with you what Jesus says. Now, before we do that, I got to tell you another story. Because what Jesus is trying to do is he's saying in this text that this is not the way I want you to live, right? He's told us that we are the salt of the earth. We are the light of the world. But I want to know, what does that mean? And I believe they did too. I think on some level they understood what that meant, at least better than we do. But it's still a little bit like if I said, hey, I want you guys to go out and be the rodeo clowns of real life. Hopefully you'd say, well, what does that mean? I kind of know what a rodeo clown does, but how do I do that for Jesus? And the problem is, Rome doesn't do it the right way at all. And even the Pharisees and Sadducees have gotten off. So Jesus says, let me bring you back to the constant. Now, does anybody like land navigation, orienteering, using compass, traveling? Some people do. I love it. My grandfather was born in 1928 in Perryton, Texas, in the Panhandle, and he loved to go out and get lost. And he liked to take me. And when I was little, it scared me to death because I would always ask him, Pop, where are we? And he'd say, I don't know. I think we're lost. And I didn't know. Sometimes we were, but most of the time we weren't, but I didn't know. But as I got older, I was like, I know, we're lost, it's fine. And then when we really were lost, it wasn't that big of a deal. But he taught me how to use a compass. He taught me how to use the stars. He taught me how to use my shadow. But his favorite thing was he would say, don't look at your compass, just tell me what direction we're going. And he would ask me this like maybe every 10, 15 minutes when we were hiking. Sometimes he'd wait a little longer, try to see if he could catch me off guard. But I got pretty good at knowing what direction I was going. And then we'd check the compass to see. But as anybody else who's done land nav knows, if you make a lot of little turns, right, real slight, it's not very long and you're going a completely different direction, but it doesn't feel like it. That's where you need the constant. That's what a compass is for. And Jesus, in this Sermon on the Mount, I would say it's his declaration of independence, but in this, he's saying, hey, we have to go back to our constant because we've gotten off. You've tried to do little things with the Torah, with the Word of God. You've tried to do things to protect it or to do this, and you've taken all these little steps away from it. And now we have to go back to our constant. And he says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If somebody slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone wants to sue you and take your shirt, give them your cloak as well. And if somebody forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Now, the eye for an eye comes from Exodus 21. And there's an interesting thing about this. We think, well, it's an eye for an eye, and it says in cases of like serious injury, a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, and so on. This is what happens. But understand this was not meant to tell you how to exact justice. At the time, it was meant to limit the retribution you could take. Because if we don't have a law and you come and kill my donkey, I might kill you in retribution. And God says we can't have that. It has to be fair. We're going to go to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. The Romans call it lex talionis, or the law of equals. Okay, and it's basically whatever happens to you is done equally to another person. This is what we would know as retributive justice. Okay, and retributive justice is just like it sounds, about retribution, and it's about punishing the person who does wrong. Okay, that's what retributive justice does. That's what the Roman world lives on. The problem with the Roman world and the law of equals is people aren't equal. There are citizens, and even among the citizens, there is a hierarchy of who's more important. And if you're a slave, you're property and you don't matter. And Jesus says, this is not right. Now, there's another kind of justice called procedural justice, and this is based on laws and procedures. It's about fairness, and we have these laws and procedures that we set up so that things will be fair. Okay? So that no matter what happens, it'll be fair. For example, tithing 10%. Here's the problem. If Josh has 10 fields and I have 1 field, let's say it takes 1 field to feed a family for a year. If I have to tithe 10% of my 1 field, then that means almost 1 day a week for the entire year my family has to go hungry. Because I don't have enough to feed them for the whole year. Josh can easily give 10% because he's got 10 times what he needs. So sometimes the procedures and the laws aren't fair, even though they're designed to create fairness. In this text, I think Jesus is pushing us towards another type of justice. Restorative justice. He wants to restore that which has been broken. Restorative justice is about restoring the things the harm, whatever. If you kill my donkey, then you owe me a donkey. But it's not just any donkey. It's probably going to be your best donkey. And then you're on top of that going to try to figure out, how do I restore our relationship? I have a friend named Dandy Don, and one year he and I built 2 bedrooms and a bathroom onto his house over the summer. And I was working for my dad at a golf course, and my dad was mad because I would clock out of work early and getting paid to go work for Dandy Don for free on his house. And he was like, I can't even pay you to come to work. And one day, Danny and I are working, and he borrowed this nice DeWalt drill, and it wasn't brand new, but I mean, it was still nice. And he set it on the ladder, it falls off and cracks the housing. Worked fine, nothing wrong with the function of it, but the housing had a big crack in it. So Danny Don went and bought a brand new drill and gave it to his friend who loaned him the drill, because he wanted to restore the relationship, not just that which was broken. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to tell us here with these things. And we're going to walk through them piece by piece and hopefully see that. But before we do, we have to deal with a problem in the text. It says, do not resist an evil person. And I don't know how that can be. Nothing that I read in the text tells me that I should just let people be evil against me. And I think we've done real injustice by understanding this text this way and saying, you know what? I'm just going to let evil continue. I will not resist it. But thankfully, there's another text that uses the Greek word here for resist. And it comes from Ephesians 6:13. I'm hoping that's right. I think it is. And it says, therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground or resist. And after you have done all this, to stand firm. Now, what it's talking about in Ephesians is not flesh and blood, but the powers and principalities of evil that we are to fight against. This is violent fighting. We have a sword, we have a shield, we have our armor on. We are ready to resist evil. But in Matthew, Jesus says, do not resist an evil person. And I think that's because if an evil person comes at me in a way with violence, and I respond in the same way, all I've done is become like them. And Jesus says, I need them to become like you. This might be for some of the zealots in the crowd. The zealots are a group of people who they want revolution from Rome. They think that they can fight Rome, that they can assassinate Romans. They even assassinate Jews that are too close to Romans. A tax collector would make a really good target. And I can imagine Matthew during the Sermon on the Mount standing way back behind Jesus so he doesn't get shanked. But I think Jesus is reaching out to some of the people in here and saying, you can't be like them. They will never see my kingdom that way. But I don't know. Now, Jesus moves on and he says, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also. Now, this is not a fist fight. Let me say that. This is not two people duking it out. And I'm going to show you why. In the ancient world, they didn't have toilets, running water, hand soap, antibacterial soap, stuff like that. So your left hand is used for what we're going to call unclean things. So you don't use it for other stuff. Use it when you go to the bathroom and things like that, because that's what you have. In some communities, if I even gestured with my left hand, I might have 10 days penance. So I have to hit you with my right hand. The problem is, if I hit you with my right hand, I forgot I had a mic. It lands on your left cheek. Unless I reach across my body. Now we're going to call it a backhand because that's appropriate for church. But that is not what I was taught it to be. But that's what it is. They're backhand. This is what masters do to slaves. This is what husbands in the Roman world did to wives and children. This is not necessarily meant to hurt you physically. It is meant to demean you and take away your humanity. To tell you, you belong beneath me. Get in your place. And Jesus says, don't let them do that to you. I've told you not to devalue or demean others. Don't let them do it to you. Turn them your other cheek as well. Now, if I turn them my left cheek, they have a couple options. One, they can hit me again, but now they hit me as an equal. Open fist or closed, doesn't matter. This is how you hit somebody who's in your station. In which case, I've exposed the injustice of what you've done. I've taken back who I am as an image bearer of God. And I've taken away your ability to say that I'm less than you. Their second option is they don't hit me again. In which case, I've taken away your option, your ability to demean me. I've said that I'm an image bearer of God, and I've brought shame on you for the way you've treated me as a fellow human. Now, there is another option. They could have me flogged or beaten, as a slave. This could happen. But they still can't take away the fact that I, too, am an image bearer of God. No matter what they do, they can't take that away. And Jesus says, don't let them. I'm going to skip the second one for a second. We're going to come back to it. We're going to go to the last one, where it says, if someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. Now, in the ancient world, we don't do this anymore because we have vehicles. But in the ancient world, if I have an army and I have to get it from place to place, let's say I have to travel them 500 miles across the empire to where there's a raging battle going on. How do I get them there? With their feet. They got to walk. They got to carry their 80 pounds of gear, their weapons, all this other stuff. So starting with the Persians, they said there's a thing that they would call angaria. Angaria is that I can come into a town and conscript all of you, your animals, your carts, your boats, whatever I want, I can take it as a part of the army, and you have to help me carry and lug all of our stuff for as far as we want. But this became a problem because people hated it. I mean, imagine how abused you could be with thousands and thousands of troops coming through. If we had a small town of 500 people, we might be carrying stuff forever. So what they said is, you can't make them go more than 1 mile. And if you do, you will be punished. Now, a centurion, who's the guy that's over 100 soldiers, okay? They have a centurion for every 100 soldiers in the Roman army. He can deal out pretty much limitless punishment if he wants to on his guys. He gets to decide. So let's say that my son does it and he makes you walk 10 miles with his pack. I might just say, Eli, you can't do that. Don't do it again. But if it's somebody who made me preach on a Sunday when I told them I didn't want to, no, I'm just kidding. I might have them strung out on the ground and flogged. The point is, you don't know. Now imagine a Roman garrison comes through and conscripts all of us as their beasts of burden. And we get to the end of our mile, and most of us start setting down our packs for them to pick back up. But the ones of us who were at the Sermon on the Mount heard Jesus give this, we just keep going. And all the soldiers are like, why do you get, and they start pointing and looking at the centurion like, why does that soldier get his stuff carried farther? And then the soldier starts to think, uh-oh, I might get in real trouble for this. And I can imagine how everybody starts to giggle as this soldier is chasing us down, trying to get their packs back from us because they don't want to get in trouble for what they're doing. And it's another way to give people who don't have a voice a way to say, this is wrong. This treats me like an animal. It takes away my humanity. And I bear the image of God. Now let's go back to the shirt one. Someone wants to sue you and take your shirt, give them your cloak as well. It's really interesting. In the Old Testament, it tells us that if I'm really, really poor and I don't have anything else to use as collateral, I can give you my cloak, my outer garment as collateral if I need something. But you have to give it back to me every night because it's also my blanket and you can't keep my blanket from me. So you got to return it every night and every day. I got to give it to you. It's this whole ordeal. And I wonder, I have no evidence for this before anybody gets all riled up. I have no evidence, but I wonder if at the time of Jesus, they weren't changing it up and taking people's shirts instead because the Torah doesn't say anything about giving them back. I just wonder about that. I hope somebody smarter than me comes along and finds that. But I also think maybe Matthew is doing it backwards to draw attention to it in and of itself. I mean, imagine somebody that's so poor, all they have to give you for collateral is their shirt. And when they can't repay their debt, you take them to court for it. All they had to give you was their shirt to start with. If it's between saving my shirt and feeding my family, I'm going to trade my shirt every time. Now, this is a culture of honor and shame. Okay? It's all about honor and shame. You don't want to be shamed, which is what we've been doing so far, trying to shame the person who is oppressing us. You want to bring honor to your family and your community. Now, we're going to have to be careful with this one because I like to say imagine a lot, but be careful. Now we're in front of the judge and I'm being sued for my shirt and I throw on my cloak as well. You know what? You want my shirt? Take my cloak. Now I don't have any clothes on. And in this culture, that's shameful. But it's more shameful for the person who caused it than it is for the person who's naked. And so as I try to make my way out of the court through the community, I can imagine the person who took it running back, trying to put your clothes back on you. Like, no, that's not worth this. It's not worth the shame that you just brought me and our whole community. And I can imagine him saying, you know what, I'll forgive your debt. But I think Jesus is trying to say to this crowd, how do you take from somebody even the shirt off their back? Does that sound like the God you claim to follow? He says, give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. This is a really poor group. They've been through some hard times and they have had almost everything taken from them. And Jesus is trying to give it back. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Go be that. Do not let people mistreat you. Do not let them devalue you. And at the same time, do not forget I came for them too. You see, this restorative justice isn't just about restoring the person who's been oppressed. It's about restoring the oppressor as well. I struggle with that. I get helping oppressed people. I get bringing value back into the lives of people who have lost it. I have a hard time saying, but the person who made this happen, them too? You came for the tax collector as well? How can that be? What we have to do is really simple, but it's super hard. Basically, what Jesus says is, here's what I need you to do. You want people to see my kingdom? Go and be what the world cannot. Anyone can take an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth, and they're just for it, but you don't have to. You can forgive. Now, this crowd, no stranger to pain and suffering, not a bit, as I imagine most of us aren't either. Some things that have been brought into our lives are truly devastating, and some are even unforgivable. So how do we forgive? We have to do what they cannot. If we want people to see the kingdom of heaven, we have to do what they cannot. Because God is not willing that any should perish. And Jesus came to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, when my kids were little, especially when we brought my son home from the hospital, I can remember they carried him out and they make sure you get your car seat in and everything, and then they handed him to me. And I can remember thinking when they did that, I was like, this is the most irresponsible thing you've ever done in your entire life. You should never give me a child. What are you doing? And then I realized, it's my kid. What else are they going to do? And I was like, this got real fast. And being a dad is hard, especially for the first time, because I didn't know what I was doing. So I taught my kids a scripture. And I said, when dad starts getting onto you too much, I want you to say this. And it's also from Ephesians 6, verse 4, I believe. And it says, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the teaching and instruction of the Lord. And this was their way to be able to remind me, hey, Dad, text says this, and you're not doing that. When I was, when I was writing them too hard, or I had made my point about what they had done that was wrong, but I was just standing on my soapbox, kept going. I had that problem sometimes because I haven't got all my anger out yet. I'm still mad about it. But when a 3-year-old says, Dad, do not exasperate your children, but instead bring them up in the way, the teaching and instruction of the Lord, you're like, yep. And then I would just have to walk off or something, I could go yell at the wall for a little bit. But that was one way I taught them to kind of do this same thing. But remember, Jesus came for us. He came for me. He came for you. I don't care what you've done. But he came for them too. Now, if you don't have this, raise your hand. Somebody will bring it to you. There's something really interesting that I want you to think about this, maybe not differently today. Maybe you guys think about this every time, but I want to think about it differently today. When Jesus got his disciples together for Passover right before he was crucified, he got out the bread. And he took the bread and he broke it. He said, this is my body given for you and for them. Remember. Now we want to remember his death, clearly, but not just that. Remember how I told you to live. Remember how they're going to see the kingdom in the way you love one another. Remember who you are and whose you are, because it matters. Let's remember. And then he took the cup. he said, this is the cup of the covenant. It's my blood poured out for you and for many. Remember, I do this for you. And I also do this for them. Let us never forget that God wants us in his kingdom, but he also wants everybody out there. Let's remember. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe. Father, I thank you for the sacrifice that you made. I thank you that you gave us a constant to come back to. When we lose our way, we can find you again. God, speak to us through your word, but help us to go and live out the love, the justice, and the mercy that your kingdom is built on. We ask these things in your Son's precious name. Amen.